In 1986, Frank Miller completely changed the superhero genre with his update to the Batman mythos, The Dark Knight Returns. Targeting a strange new demographic of adult comic book readers, this graphic novel darkened a character made downright dorky by Adam West and company. This version of Batman was older, more realistic, and more tuned to the violent roots of the old Detective Comics series. It was a sea change in superheroes, and the beginning of a swell in Batman's popularity that would reach new heights a few years later in movie theaters. Both of your hosts have fond memories of poring over this book, but hadn't revisited it since the early 90s. So, we mixed up some screwdriver cocktails and sat down to discuss our latest read. Welcome to episode 61 of Toasting the Classics, The Dark Knight Returns.
Welcome to Toasting the Classics, the podcast where we take something that people call a classic, drink something inspired by the classic, and then talk about it to see whether it's still a classic. My name's Dave McArthur.
And I am Clint Lanier. Welcome, everybody. Today we are going to be talking about Batman, The Dark Knight Returns, or originally it was just The Dark Knight Returns. It's a Frank Miller joint. It was Frank Miller when he was working for DC. He did a lot of freelancing for DC and for Marvel. Frank Miller wrote it. He penciled it. I think it was colored by his first wife.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Lynn Varley did the color.
Yeah, Lynn Varley. They worked together for almost 20 years, and they were married together for almost 20 years. Klaus Johnson did the inking, and John Costanza did the lettering.
The inker is the tracer, right?
Yeah. So the penciler actually, it's just like in a cartoon, original cartoon before they had like computer animation. Now they would pencil in everything, kind of rough it out. But I mean, the rough drawings were good enough for the inker to then come over and trace it out so that it's not so rough. And so usually we would have kind of layers, but essentially he's the artist. It was originally released in 4 parts as a 4-part kind of mini series. Those
were just regular size comic books, right? Those are just like the ones you get off the spin rack.
Not really. They were actually, so this is like, I was just looking, it was 1986, I believe, or 84.
Yeah, it's February to June of 86.
So what they did is they bound these comic books were stapled in the middle, right? They had the long folds on them and they're stapled in the middle and folded in the middle. This was actually bound. They were bound like a book. So each one was comic book thickness, but they had the glued laminate spine on them. And then so it allowed them to have this really beautiful kind of laminate covers. And so they sold for $3, which is a lot of money in 86. I mean, comic books are still $1 at the time.
The stories seem long to me. The individual, like my book has cuts for like where each original issue ended. And they seem like they would have been a really long issue. It seemed like you were getting more for your money also in terms of story.
You're getting a higher quality of product because the comic books were, even in 86, they're notoriously printed like pulp fiction books. I mean, just a really cheapest kind of newsprint paper that you can find. Like I said, stapled and everything else. This was a glued laminate square spine with this beautiful wraparound laminate cover. And then the inside was just like if you've got any of the graphic novels, the quality of the interior is exactly like what it would have been. I mean, it was super high quality. So it was $3, which is kind of cheap now. By today's standard, this thing would have been like $7 or $8 per issue, probably. But this is unheard of. I mean, it was a bit of a gamble on DC's part to do that. But apparently it sold like crazy. I mean, they're upwards of 100,000 or something like that per issue.
It was a big event too. I mean, they plugged it, like they told everybody it was coming. I think Frank Miller was already coming off big success with Daredevil.
Right.
I think. I'm trying to remember which one came first, but I think he did Daredevil.
Yeah, Daredevil came first for sure, yeah.
So this was kind of a big deal. They invested in it a little bit. I remember there being lots of cheap knockoffs of this. Like I remember Marvel did a series and they actually called it the Iraq Knight for like Spider-Man. They tried to
I remember that. Yeah.
Spider-Man cooler. And even as like a 12-year-old or whatever I was like, that's lame.
This is what made Batman cool, man. Batman was lame for a long time. Well, let's just talk about, let's for those who haven't read it, for those 5 of our 5 listeners, the one person who hasn't read this, the synopsis of the story is that we're looking at an alternative kind of history, but it's a alternative future. It's set in the same timeline. So it's set in 1986. And what he does is he goes back and he says, well, you know, Batman's like 50 something years old, 55 years old, I think. He's been retired for 12 years. There's reasons for the retirement that are kind of alluded to. There's no exposition really on it.
I love how all of the backstory is completely alluded to. Some of which I've read this multiple times, and there are little things in there that I'm like, whoa, is that what's going on? Like, I was figuring out some things this time, and I was like, is that what that means? Is that what's happening here? It's very cool. Like the whole, he retired because the second incarnation of Robin died. I guess would have been around 1983 in real world terms when that character was written out, Jason Todd.
Yeah, Jason Todd. But there's also this allusion to sort of what happened in actually The Incredibles, of all things, where people meaning civilians, like the whole world community or society, decided that they didn't want superheroes. And you see it in the commentary. We're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. Let's go back to the synopsis real quick, and then we'll circle back to this. But the synopsis it's a retired older Batman. He's like 55 years old, which is 7 years older than me. He keeps talking about how his heart's about to give out and everything else. I'm like, oh man, crud. I hope with testosterone and vitamins, maybe I can keep it up a little longer than that. But in any case,
we're not beating up 20-year-olds and climbing.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. But then he just, there's so much crime in Gotham, and it's actually, reading this book now is kind of prescient when you look at like all the defund the police and what that sort of led to, like all of the crime and all this crazy stuff that's going on in society right now. Yeah. And so you've got that. You've got like a society that treats criminals like pobrecitos, as we would say here in the Southwest. Like, well, it's not their fault that they're criminals. Right. So let's just slap them on the hand and let them go, which is exactly what's going on, right? As a result, I don't know as a result of this, but is it? But Miller alludes that as a result of this, you've got rampant crime on the street, stuff going on, and so he just can't take it anymore, and he comes out of retirement.
I was torn when reading it about thinking, did he mean that? Yeah, I mean, it's just sort of a general moral rot. I mean, he's kind of drawing on Dirty Harry and like Taxi Driver and like that depiction of the big cities, especially Dirty Harry. I think he explicitly said that was an inspiration. But in this world, it also could be read as being because the superheroes have been removed from the equation.
Well, I think so. I think so. But he really pushes that ideology about it's not the criminal's fault. It's the fault of society. It's the fault of everybody else. Therefore, we can't blame the criminals. I mean, it really is a commentary on that. Now, I don't know if he's doing that for narrative effect or if he really believes that.
I think it's really complicated because there's some of that. Obviously, there's some of that kind of like, oh, these days, this moral corruption and But there's also everybody's getting made fun of. I mean, nobody in this is coming out clean. Like every single
yeah, absolutely.
The police are being lampooned, hippies are being lampooned, psychiatry is being lampooned.
Superman's being
Superman, Ronald Reagan. Nobody's good in this. Everybody's I think it's just supposed to be sort of satirical.
I think it's magnifying existing flaws.
But Ronald Reagan, for instance, is a really good. He's like a very extreme version, like a caricature of the actual Ronald Reagan.
Right.
He's like the way people used to sort of make fun of him, just making him like completely just an actor and kind of like a bozo. And that's how everybody comes across. Robin's parents are constantly smoking pot.
It's almost predictive, though. Again, we're getting ahead of ourselves because we're not helping the people. That one person who hasn't read this, but he's talking. If he's lampooning that ideology that you can't blame the criminals. Again, he's being very prophetic because that's where we are now. Your DA there in Manhattan has been in the news quite a bit for letting people off the hook who have been very, very violent offenders.
People did this in the 70s, and then everything goes to hell, and people are like, wait a minute, we should probably put criminals in jail. Everybody suddenly realized. All the people that actually live in these neighborhoods.
If I remember correctly, that attitude spawned Giuliani, who then, quote unquote, cleaned up the town. I mean, through very extreme measures in the 90s. They booted him out, and so it kind of like it's very cyclical, as you're saying. That's a great idea.
Yeah, it's definitely it's a lot of the same issues that are going on. I actually just happened to watch Dirty Harry. It like came up on Netflix a couple of days ago, and I was like, oh, I've never seen that. And I was watching it, and I was like, oh, that's the same story. It's like the same story. What's going on?
Right.
And I imagine Frank Miller did not mention this in anything I read, but the whole idea of the superheroes, like Green Lantern, like flying back into space, and Wonder Woman going back to her people and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's literally like Atlas Shrugged. It's like Ayn Rand philosophy going on.
Sort of.
You know, oh, the common people are like burdening these Ubermensch so much that they can't continue to help humanity. So they just fly away to space.
It's not burdening. It's lack of appreciation, perhaps. And the only one that stayed was Superman because he became like a pawn. Like Batman says, you know, he'll salute anything in a flag. What does he say? He'll answer to anybody with a flag or a badge. Okay. All right. Let's get back to the synopsis. Sorry. So what happens then? He comes out of retirement. At the same time, there's Arkham Asylum, and Two-Face comes out of Arkham Asylum, creates a bunch of problems. Batman goes after him. At the same time, there's this kind of gang taking over Gotham City. They're called the Mutants. He eventually beats up the mutant leader, but throughout this, he's showing his age. The mutant leader basically almost kills him because the mutant leader is like 20 years old and just a stud. And Batman's
some kind of a superhuman. It's not clear why are there mutants. I don't know why there are mutants, but apparently, although the rest of the gang doesn't act, they just seem to just be humans.
They seem to be just human idiot.
The leader seems to be some kind of monster.
He reminded me of that guy on Mad Max Road Warrior, the second movie. What was his name?
Humongous.
Humongous. That guy. Right.
Definitely. You know who he's patterned on, actually. You know who the mutant leader is based on?
Who's that?
According to Frank Miller, is Clubber Lang in Rocky 3.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that.
I don't remember that movie well enough to say, but whatever. That seems kind of cruel, Mr. T, but whatever.
He had the same kind of attitude. I remember a line from there. It's like, so, Clubber, what do you predict from this fight? He looks at the camera. He says, pain. Lots of pain, right? Yeah. That was my best Mr. T. So anyway, so flash forward, he also has to go after the Joker. The Joker comes back, causes a bunch of mayhem.
The Joker coming back seems to be caused by Batman coming back. It seems like the Joker was catatonic and not doing anything wrong, just sitting in the asylum, and then all of a sudden he sees Batman on TV. And he's back and starts. I don't know what he's trying to say with that part of the story.
I don't either.
About that a lot. I was like, so it's Batman's fault.
That one I don't get. Yeah, we can come back. We can come back and talk to that. But then at the end, he finally has to fight Superman because Superman is ordered to put Batman down since he's like the last of the superhero type of thing. And I won't spoil it for you. Big fight, big climax, and stuff like that. So
Batman Superman fight at the end takes place amidst also a World War III between the Soviets and the Americans. That's a pretty major plot point as well.
Over the fictional Cordo Maltese, which that's it. Reception.
Yeah, that's the story.
Yeah, that's the story.
It might be time to discuss what we're drinking.
Oh, right. Okay. So we're having a screwdriver, which is vodka and orange juice.
What kind of proportions did you use for yours? Or did you just throw them together?
I just kind of threw them together.
Yeah, that's what I did because I was like, "Well, why am I looking this up? Like how to make a screwdriver?"
I think it's about probably 1 part vodka to maybe like 3 parts orange juice or something like that.
I think that's about what I did. Yeah, and I did have to look up whether or not you're supposed to use ice. I really wanted to use ice. It seemed like it'd be a lot better with ice. Essentially, I guess 3 ingredients. It's vodka, OJ, and then you got ice and a little bit of melt water.
It's the easiest thing you make. Now, let me tell you why I picked this drink. So for those first hearing this podcast in the dystopian future, the way this sort of works is whoever suggests the potential classic, which I did, also has to come up with a drink that kind of sort of corresponds to whatever the classic is. Now, in Frank Miller's novel, or graphic novel rather, Batman is drinking, we're assuming it's whiskey, because at the beginning he's drinking it with Gordon. Gordon mentions that, that he finally likes the taste of whiskey or something. And then all these years he's been drinking ginger ale and telling everybody that it was champagne or something because it was Bruce Wayne, it was Batman, he can do it. But I thought, well, let's go back in the archives and let's see what we can do for finding something kind of fun. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to take us back to 1966. Adam West is playing our very first Batman on the small screen. He's on the path of a guy called the Riddler. So the Riddler goes into this nightclub. This is the 66, swinging 60s, baby. Let's just see what happens here. He's walking into the nightclub. Can you hear it?
It's Batman!
Yeah, I can hear it.
Okay.
Anything I can do for you, sir? Check your tape?
Ringside table, Batman?
Just looking, thanks. I'll stand at the bar. I shouldn't wish to attract attention.
As he says, wearing a Batman costume.
Right.
Everybody's dancing around him. Crazy. This is totally where Austin Powers got their stuff from.
Yeah.
Making his way, making his way to the bar. He's a stunning redhead and orders. Ready?
A large fresh orange juice, please.
Yes, sir. Your orange juice, sir. Batman special.
Is there vodka in that?
Well, I'm not going to spoil the ending for you. You'll have to go and watch the entire clip. But there is something in it. There is something in it after all. So that's where I get this drink. His drinking that orange juice, spiked orange juice, leads to him doing a dance that's become famous.
Right.
It's called the Batusi. That's right.
Yeah, I remember that. I used to watch that Adam West show. I mean, I used to watch it a lot. It was on syndication. It was on every day after school. And I liked it. But Batman was not cool. Like, from watching that show, Batman was not a cool character. Like, I did not. There were toys and some of the comics I was aware of that were like a little more serious. You know, like I thought the Batmobile was super cool. But that show was pretty much my idea of Batman. And I just was not into Batman until it's completely. And then the film, and then the Tim Burton movie, obviously, which was a couple of years after Dark Knight.
Yeah, that's sort of the point, isn't it? Until Frank Miller did this, Batman was lame, right? He was kind of he was a joke. They'd hit somebody, they do the pow, and they'd kick somebody and say wham or something like that, right? And they tried to make it like a comic book. It's a fun show. It's a stupid show.
Yeah.
But
no, I used to like it. I used to like it when I was a kid. It's just,
but it wasn't, he wasn't cool. And then Frank Miller comes along and he's like, I'm going to do this different. They call this the dark age of comics. Did you know that in the 80s? It's when comics became dark, when they became mature, essentially.
I thought you meant, okay, I got it.
And they
was this the first one though?
See, The Watchmen came out the same year.
Watchmen, I actually looked that up. The Watchmen is later.
It's later in the year, but they came out the same year. So they both came out in 86.
Yeah.
But those two are both credited side by side as issuing in this sort of dark age of comics. And by dark, they mean comics become dark now, right? They're no longer silly. They're no longer trying to appeal to 8-year-olds. They become
they're for adults.
Yeah,
for adult
serious
comic book readers. Yeah. I think in the 60s, people would have just, what do you mean adult comic book reader? Is this person an idiot? Why would an adult read comic books?
That's how they started, which is kind of Miller's point. They started in the 30s and 40s. Batman carried a gun. Very few people know that, but he carried a 45 and shot people when he first came out.
He uses a gun in this. That
M60. Yeah,
that was all. No, not just there's a couple of guns. He uses an M60, picks up a gun when he's fighting the Joker, shoots at but he uses it to shoot like the gasoline to set it off, I guess, or something like that. Yeah.
Oh, that's right.
But,
he does that.
That was the rival for maybe being my biggest surprise, but that's not what I ended up choosing. So I thought that was strange that he used. I remember people talking about how the original Detective Comics he used to use a gun, but I've never seen.
He carried a pistol. I had a digest, obviously multi-reprint, but I had a digest of it was like a 40-year anniversary or something. And it's really interesting. It was pretty dark. Okay, so a friend of mine collects comic books, and this guy he's a GI surgeon, and so he's doing pretty well for himself. And he's been collecting comics since we were kids. Matter of fact, when we were friends at 12 years old, we would go and collect comics and stuff. He still has all his comics that we collected, but obviously now he has a bigger billfold and he can collect even more. His thing happens to be World War II and Korean War era war comics. And he's like one of those major collectors, like auction houses call him and say, hey, we have a buyer for this particular issue of this particular comic book. We know that you have it. He's willing to give you this much for it. Like they'll call him and ask him for it. he was turned on to, from inside information, he was turned on to an estate sale, and he ended up buying multiple issues of war comics, and they were like late 30s, early 40s, owned by Dick Winter from Band of Brothers. Major Richard Winters, the original, the guy in Easy Company that they made the movie about. And it actually has his autograph, like he wrote on it, property of Dick Winters. So if you think about it, Dick Winters was an adult when he was reading these comics. He was, in his late teens, at least, if not early 20s, because he was an officer. So he went to officer candidate school. And so he would have been in his 20s and 44. So he was probably reading these in, early 40s and late 30s. My point of all this is that comic books, they were an adult entertainment. I mean, there were the kids, I think Popeye and some of the others, but it wasn't looked down on, Captain America fought the Nazis. Miller was trying to get back to that. He was trying to say, look, this is kind of where they come from. This is where I want them to be again.
Well, it was a good idea. I mean, I would say probably today, most comic book readers are probably adults. I think it's not a huge thing for kids, for one thing, because it's expensive. They don't have 25-cent, 50-cent comics anymore. They're a pretty significant purchase. Like, right. I've taken Alex to the comic book store a couple of times, and he's gotten stuff, and it's like he has to choose to, it's $5 or $6 to get a comic for the most, but
for sure, easily.
I have to be like, I don't want to just have him buy that and then just tear it into shreds like what a kid would do with something. So I have Did I ever tell you I used to work at a comic book store when I was in college?
No, you never brought that up. Yeah. We even talked about Silver Surfer. You never talked about that.
Yeah, I worked at a comic book store when I was in college, and I was working behind the counter, and the phone rang one day, and I pick up the phone, and the guy on the phone, it asks for the manager of the store. And I was like, yeah, can I tell him who's calling? And he says, it's Frank. And I was like, Frank who? And he's like, Frank Miller. And I'm like, what? Like Frank Miller? And he was like, yeah, I'm coming to do a signing for like 300. Like
holy cow.
300 came out. And I was just like completely flabbergasted. Wow. I was like, I can't believe I'm talking to Frank Miller on the phone. So it was one of my biggest brushes.
Okay, so did you go to the signing, and did you get the?
I have 300, the original one, signed by Frank Miller.
Oh man! Oh, okay.
It's one of my best comics that I own. It is the best comic I own. So
I'm bowing down to him, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. Well, let's just get into that. I mean, I don't think many comic book artists or writers are given their due credit, right? Mm-hmm. Stan Lee, for example, he was looked at as kind of an icon, but it was more of an icon for pop culture, not for art. Like we have Stephen King. Who's Stephen King? Oh, he's a writer. He's an author. He's an artist. Who's Stan Lee? Oh, he ran Marvel.
Stephen King has a similar reputation, though, where he sort of is any serious literary writers, they're going to sort of look down on his work. And I think
it's true. But I think like if there's a grain elevator of seriousness, like at the very top it might be Rembrandt or Hemingway or something like that. And you've got scales that go down. Yeah. I think Stephen King is above Stan Lee. That's all I'm saying. It's like he's.
I think Stan Lee, his reputation has increased over time because it's just seen. He's like Walt Disney. He's just seen as this huge figure in American pop culture. It's just even though you read the history of Marvel, Stan Lee's sort of taking credit for some of the things that some other people did. Like, I mean, he's definitely responsible for a lot of it, but I think he gets a little more credit. It's sort of like Walt Disney. Did Walt Disney really create a lot of stuff himself? Sort of. He's definitely involved in it. Sort of the business brains behind a lot of it, but he drew Mickey Mouse.
Well, I mean, Ub Iwerks, I think, has more Oscars than Walt Disney had, if I remember correctly. Could the I'm going to say Man on the Street because that's what they've always called it. Let's say could the Zay on the Street ever like come up with the name of one Disney animator? Just one, right? And they'll say they'd say Walt Disney. Well, Walt Disney never animated anything. Right. Yep. Stan Lee's kind of like that. Like Stan Lee, he did start out. If you know the story of Marvel, you know that he sort of fell into this management position because nobody else wanted it, and they're about to go bankrupt. So, and he kind of saw it through.
Sort of bring it back to Frank Miller, though. I wanted to ask you. So he does the penciling for this. He does all the drawing for this. I've got in the back of my book here. There's a whole bunch of his original sketches, like from putting the book together. What do you think of his drawing? Because I loved this when I was a kid. I mean, I read it over and over again. But there's definitely some of the artwork in here that I don't think is very good.
He had I mean, he has.
Some of it is style. Some of it is stylistic. I remember the scenes where Superman is like carrying the nuclear weapon and gets like turned into like a skeleton afterwards.
Yeah.
I hated the way that looked.
I thought it was great. Have you?
But it was a style. But it was a style, and it's like now I kind of appreciate it. I think it looks kind of cool. But it bothered me. Superman depicted that way.
Okay, so let me ask you this. Okay, so you've got 300, and honestly, I hate to say it, I don't have 300, but I have Electro Assassin. I have Wolverine. I have his Daredevils. I have Ronin.
That's cool.
I actually have the full original Electra Assassin miniseries, and I have a full Ronin miniseries. I would love to get him signed by him. That would be my dream. But in any case, but if you've seen either one of those, like the artwork it becomes like, especially in Electra, it becomes much more abstract than this.
Yeah.
Like this is tame. And then like in Electra, you've got like almost cubism or something like that at some point. So you're like, what is that supposed to be? You know?
I like some of the abstract stuff, but there's some of the way he's drawing the human forms. It looks like it's poorly done. Some of them, like especially like I said, the mutant leader. There's a couple of drawings. This one where the mutant leader is like standing on the pile of junk, and I'm like, what kind of body is that? What is going on with his body in that coat? But it's like everything else looks so cool. The tank Batmobile looks pretty neat in that same sequence. There's a really good bit of Batman, like this one where he's getting ready for the fist fight with the mutant.
Oh yeah, I see. Okay, so I see that. So all right, so he actually said the mutant leader's got like one nipple popping out, or is that a spike? I don't know what that is, but
I don't know what's going on in that drawing.
So he has said, like, his belief is that comic book artists should not pursue realism. Like that's the last thing they should do.
Right.
He's trying to bridge a gap between a book where it's all mental, it's all your imagination, and a visual. Right. And so what he's doing is he's giving you sort of a cue. He's not giving you a photograph. He's giving you, this is sort of what it looks like. Now you fill in the gap. You figure out what it should smell like and taste like and really look like you detail it yourself. Right. He's trying to fill in a gap between just pure text and imagination. I mean, that's sort of what he does. Like if you look at that one particular drawing, you've got these silhouettes behind him. You've got like this just pencil outline of the skyline of Gotham. This just kind of, it almost looks like a quick sketch of this weird looking mutant guy. He looks like a mutant. I'll give that to him. Yeah, and then under him, you've got this kind of nondescript pile of like car axles and just junk, right? You don't know what it is. Or a famous quote by Picasso. And I think we've talked about this before. We've done enough episodes now that I can't remember what all we've talked about, but Picasso was like 12 years old. He entered an art contest, and he painted a portrait of a sick woman in a bed and a doctor attending to the sick woman. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but you can look it up and Google it. And it's all real. He used realism. I mean, that was his pursuit at the time, and it's amazing. His mom happens to be the woman in bed, and the doctor, I think, is his father. He uses his father's kind of likeness for that. It is real. I mean, it's like all of the realist paintings, so this would have been, mid to late 1800s. And it's amazing. At 12 years old, he could do that. By the time he passed away, like in his 90s, so in the mid 1900s, he's making blocks, right? And I mean, cubism and very abstract and everything else. And his quote was, when I was a child, I had to learn to paint like an adult so that when I was an adult, I could paint like a child.
Right.
And I think that's sort of what Miller is doing. I mean, Miller, if you look at his early stuff, he's totally realist. I mean, it's amazing. But this, you look at it and you're like, man, a 5-year-old could do that, right? but there's something else to it. There's a layer to it. Like he's doing it intentionally, and that's the point. I tell my students that all the time. I teach composition, and there's this whole movement to like students should be able to write whatever they want and however they want. And I push back on this theory. Students can do that once they understand the rules.
Yeah, I totally
basic
agree.
rules, and then you can do whatever you want. You can break those rules, but you have to know why you're breaking them.
Because when somebody says to you, oh, you used the wrong tense for this right here, you have to be able to say, yes, that's a conscious decision. I decided not to do
exactly.
that.
Exactly.
I know what the rule is. Otherwise, you sound like an idiot if you don't know
that's
it.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right.
That's
totally, exactly right.
It's very similar. Very similar. Yeah, you can't really deconstruct what was never constructed in the first place.
That's exactly. And so what he's doing is this actually lines up with postmodernism. So 1986, you're in the throes of postmodernism at that time. I think Don Henley had a postmodern. It's a postmodern modern world or whatever was the name of that stupid song that came out probably about that time. Like this is the era of postmodernism. 70s, 80s. We got Derrida, we got Foucault. You got all these postmodern French theorists. So that's what he's doing. He's deconstructing. And that's what you do is you deconstruct whatever it happens to be. And so he's deconstructing it. He's deconstructing art. It's really kind of interesting because going back to Disney started doing this in like the 60s. Are you familiar with the movie Aristocats? I think it's Aristocats. Yeah. And then like Lady in the Tramp. And basically think back to like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, right? Do you remember how every leaf was painted green and like all the little animals were doing their thing, whatever. Okay. And it was all that was realism, right? And then flash forward to the 60s. And then you had, if you look at like the Aristocats and you look like Lady in the Tramp and stuff, and even 101 Dalmatians, they've just got like an outline of like the skyline of a city. Like they don't even try to fill it in. They've got like hashes and stuff like that. And that was just this kind of abstract.
If you're being generous to them, you say that that's a stylistic choice. And if you're not, you're saying it's cheap not to have it really elaborate.
It was, I think it was complimentary on both. Yeah, what I mean, it was like one led to the other. Disney hated it. He absolutely hated it. But by the 60s, he was pretty much out as controlling Disney. So he didn't really have a say. But
one of my favorite things about the artwork in this is like, so I kind of, sometimes some of the drawing, like I said, it's not, sometimes it throws me off a little bit, but the composition of some of these big drawings in this is terrific. It's like shots that stayed in my head for the rest of my life. And like when they did the film of Sin City and when they did the film of 300, we were able to just take things that Frank Miller had done on the page and literally use it like it was a storyboard for a film. Yeah. And I'm surprised this was never really done as a film. It seems to me like kind of a no-brainer to try to film this. They use aspects of it in many, many things. There's an animated version. But in terms of like a feature film, it's inspired a lot of stuff in the modern Batman movies, but they never did like just the Dark Knight Returns film. Probably because it would be confusing in terms of the timeline and stuff like that, because they're trying to build their own universe.
I don't know. I mean, so is it DC? Yeah, DC Warner Brothers. They're just stupid. I think they think that people are stupid. The best.
They really seem to be playing catch up. I mean, except for the Batman films, everything else just seems like a cheap version, like a second mover version.
Right.
Of
they keep saying like, oh, they'll never understand that. Like fans will never go for that, or fans will never understand that. But like, no, you just start. You got to start somewhere. And the best grossing DC movie was this last one.
What's really insane about it, I was talking to Alex about this the other day when I was mentioning we were going to do this book. And what's crazy about it is if you put together the 5 most popular comic book characters of all time, I think you get to number 3 or 4 before you hit a Marvel. Batman and Superman are huge. They're bigger than anything
right.
Spider-Man probably comes in the top 5, and that's probably Marvel's top character. And they didn't even have him in the MCU when they started making the MCU. That's a crazy thing. They didn't have Fantastic Four, X-Men, or Spider-Man, the top properties. They had Captain America, which like that's nowhere near as popular as Batman. Maybe it is now.
No, that's not true, because they came out with X-Men before Captain America.
But it wasn't. It was I don't know, Sony or somebody did those. I can't.
Oh, that's right. It was Sony. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
I can't remember the whole complicated thing. They still haven't introduced the X-Men into the MCU yet. Probably why they made so many X-Men movies. But we think of DC as being sort of a secondhand thing, like the cheaper the films just seem like a knockoff version. But Batman and Superman are the biggest thing. They're bigger than you can imagine. Batman's been very successful in the films. That's aside. Those Christopher Nolan movies are huge. But Superman hasn't made a good movie since Superman 2.
That's true. You're right. I would venture to guess, like, as a property, like intellectual property, I would bet Batman and Superman would probably actually individually, each one of those are worth as much as all the Avengers, because think of all you could do with it, right?
Although maybe
I think so.
Now after these big films, that may not be true, but that was definitely true before.
Well, I think they're figuring that out with Batman, because you've got Joker as a spin-off franchise now, right. And I think they're making a second one or whatever. You've got Harley Quinn, so you could have these different spin-offs and explore all kinds of weird stuff. They tried to do that. Justice League was terrible, right? It was just terrible. But you've got the potential, though, if you reboot it and do it well and get rid of like Ben Affleck. You've got the Flash, you've got Aquaman. I mean, you've got a lot of like top tier characters.
They're huge characters. Wonder Woman.
Wonder Woman was great. The first one was great. Yep. But 1984 sucked.
It was okay. I watch it with my kids. The kids liked it. When you have a little girl, Wonder Woman's just, you're going to like Wonder Woman.
Yeah, I guess so. So I want to ask you, so is Frank Miller an artist? Like, what do you think of him? What do you think of just Frank Miller? I say Frank Miller.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. He's an artist. I think, to me, so if he just was drawing things faithfully, somebody told him what to draw and he drew it, then maybe you could say that that's not an artist. But even then, I think you're still making choices and things like that and making creative decisions. So, I mean, yeah, definitely an artist. It's just a question of where does he stand? Would I rather look at his work than Basquiat's? Yes. But I don't know if I really think he's a better artist.
How about Jackson Pollock? Is your other work?
I like Jackson. I get what Jackson Pollock's doing more so than I do with Basquiat. But yeah, obviously I enjoy, I don't know, those huge canvases and everything. I kind of know the way those are pretty cool. I like that Batmobile thing, stuff like that. Like the shots with the lightning behind Batman jumping and stuff like that. It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool stuff. Mm-hmm. It's cinematic is what it is. And
it really is. Yeah. He thinks like a director, doesn't he?
Uh-huh.
I mean, like, he sort of like lays things out like his, and that's kind of the cool thing about comic books is like every panel could be like a shot. This, if we were to shoot this as a film, like that's the shot I want. That's the shot I want. That's the shot I want.
He's clearly an artist who's been informed by film. Whereas I think like if you go back to the Marvel comic stuff, the Fantastic Four stuff we were talking about, those are drawn differently than you would for a film.
Oh God, yeah.
There's shots where everybody's just kind of standing there and not doing anything. And it was its own art form and it's cool. Like I'm not knocking it. But this is somebody who grew up watching movies from the time he was a little kid. And in his mind, he's creating a film. I do that with my writing. I had trouble with that when I accidentally give stage directions and things and like say how I want the person to accent the line. And I'm like, I gotta cut that. Just let the reader do it for themselves. I'm not writing a script. And even if you were writing a script, you don't put that much stage direction into the script. So it's because I grew up on films. And to some extent, that's really the genre that I love, is creating films, but don't have the opportunity to do it. So I think there's a little bit going on with that with Frank Miller. I think he's sort of like that.
Yeah, he is. Although he does like, it is sort of minimalist. You know, I mean, he'll have transitions. He'll have transitions from one panel to the next where it's like, there was a lot that was missed in that panel. You know, there's a pretty prominent book about comic book writing.
This is a good drink, by the way. I like this.
Yeah, it's not bad, right?
I haven't had a screwdriver in a long time, but it's a good drink. I like orange juice.
How can you not?
Orange juice, so it's nice. I didn't get fresh orange juice. It's just, Minute Maid out of a plastic bottle. But
I can't find it. But there's a book on comic book theory. Okay.
Oh, okay.
I can't remember the name of it. We should. I'll let you know. We can put it in the comments or whatever down in the description. I think Murray is the name of the guy. He talks about like what happens between panels. Like there is, if you think about it, there's narrative happening between the panels, right? And if you look at a comic book, you'll have like, say, you'll have Batman facing left, right? And he'll say something. And then all of a sudden in the next one, he's facing right and he'll say something. Okay. So between the panel was that transition from either him facing left to right or the perspective changing from left to right.
Camera moving.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So between the panel is where our imagination is.
Right.
Right. So you have a panel, says all this stuff, and then another panel, and we have to fill in that gap. I think Miller, over anything else, I think that might be, if you think about it, if you go back and look at it, that might be where his mastery lies. Like, because he'll have a panel, and then he'll have another panel that has nothing to do with the previous like 4 panels.
There's just some bits in here where the writing is powerful, and I wish that I had written it down a little bit, but there's a couple of lines. Well, in 300 is good. There's a whole bunch of stuff that just translated right from the page into the film, and it's a terrific line in the movie. Like things like, the part where he kicks the guy into the well and stuff like that. There's some bits like that in here where he's first coming back. Like he first comes back. Oh, there's the bit where he goes after some bad guys, and the old cop just kind of stops the car, and he's like, sit back, kid, we're in for a show. Apparently somebody took that and put it in one of the Batman movies. They took that line and stuck it into one of the movies. Mm-hmm. I don't remember which one. Maybe it's Dark Knight.
Yeah, that's the first one. That's the first Chris Nolan one. Yeah.
No, the first one is Batman Begins.
Oh, that's right. No, I think there's one called The Dark Knight Rises.
That's it.
That's the second one.
I thought so. You were talking about what he does in between the panels as being one of his biggest strengths. I'm mentioning the writing. I think the writing is terrific a lot of the time.
Oh, it is.
One really interesting choice that he makes here is that in a comic book, when you need to do exposition, you can just put a box of text into a panel and tell people what's happening. It's this day. And he completely doesn't do that. He instead takes these talking heads from TV and has them give broadcasts on what's happening all over the city and stuff. And I think that's brilliant. I love that. I think that's really effective. It's part of what's wrong with this world is like the media's run rampant and stuff like that.
Right.
Hard to believe anybody was ever worried about cable TV, but there you have it.
Well, there was at the time, there was a show called, I think it was called Crossfire. That was sort of like one of the first cable news shows where they would just sit there and like argue back and forth. And so he sort of riffs on that, but I think at the time it was sort of new.
Yeah, I think it was.
But
what was the name of that guy? Morton Downey? Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, Morton Downey. Yeah,
he was like the first really like sort of shock jock type of TV guy. He would just say, I don't even remember watching it, but I just remember him being a big part of the culture, like around.
I would say actually like Merv Griffin, actually before that. Okay, so let's talk real quick because we're actually butting up against our time here. Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about legacy. I saw that's going to be after I went back and reread this because I don't think I'd read this since the 80s. Okay, I went back and reread it.
Long time since
and then when I was reading it, I was like, oh, that's in the Batman movie, and oh, that's in that movie, and oh, that's in that movie, like him falling through a hole and then all the bats coming. Okay, that's in the Chris Nolan
Batman Begins, probably.
Batman Begins, right? I think that the character of Alfred was pretty much across a spectrum replicated from this book. You've got the Batcave. I mean, it's just so much that is then replicated. They took pieces and parts from it.
There was a really cool drawing of the Batcave that predated this that I had when I was a little kid. It was in one of these books that I had, and it was just like there was a dinosaur skeleton and like fighter jets. It looked like a museum. And
I remember that.
I would look at that picture like over and over again. I was just like, oh, the Batcave is so cool. Like that's what I want in my house. So
that's an old one. Yeah, that's a very old one because that was a really cool one. Because I remember that one. Yeah, but I was just looking at like all the things that were then used from this, and then used like in the Batman movie. So that's like I think one piece of legacy.
One other concrete legacy, like when he fights Superman and he has that suit. He wears that suit in the Batman versus Superman movie.
Yeah.
So that's just a minor observation I'm making. But I did want to bring up, and before we get to the end of the show, I did want to bring up something. One complaint I read somebody had about this that completely reflected a problem I had in the back of my head and hadn't put together was the Batman Superman fight is pretty contrived. I don't really understand why that happens. I don't understand why when Batman has just saved the city after the nuclear war, why all of a sudden the government's going after him. What did he do to set off the government? He seems to be on their radar for no reason. Now, I love the Superman-Batman fight. It's awesome. So I never really complained about it. But I was reading it this time and I was like, this is a little Deus Ex. This is not really explained by what's going on in the text. This just happens.
Okay, so this is my understanding of it. So again, he's being prophetic. I think it seems to me that the politicians, because it's Reagan that decides that, the politicians are bending to the will of the people, like what's in the air. So it's not whether it's good or bad. It's you have these talking heads on TV that say he's bad and therefore he should be rounded up and stopped. Okay. And so therefore they need to go after him and stop him. Again, it's fairly prescient. It's looking at a time when public opinion sways political choices or mandates, I guess you could call it, whatever you want to call it, and that, I think that's sort of what it is. So it's when you have the talking heads, you've got the Lana Lang, who's the editor of whatever it's
the Daily Planet.
Daily Planet, yeah. So you've got Lana Lang versus whatever that other guy's name was. And then you got like that kind of the man on the street interviews, and they're like talking about how bad he is and blah, blah, blah. But the funny thing is, like, you're right. It's all satire because you've got this jerk who's talking about how I'm going to sue him and everything else. And he gave me a broken leg. But it was all because he was a complete DB. And Alex, don't look up DB.
Beyond that, like sort of a murderer. Another thing I really like about that fight, and it's illustrative of something I like about the entire comic, was one of my favorite things reading it when I was a kid, because I was not a huge comic reader. So I really liked how everything was kind of hinted at, and you were sort of assumed to be able to figure out sort of the DC universe. In the fight with Superman, he has Green Arrow show up, shoot Superman with an arrow, and he mentions how it took him a really long time to synthesize it. They never say kryptonite. They never mention that it's green kryptonite.
They don't have to. Yeah, they don't have to.
Because it's left up. I mean, Stan Lee would 100% have somebody standing there going, "This is kryptonite," and Superman, that is your weakness.
Yeah, right.
I think that's great. I loved having to figure that. I loved how they would refer to, like, Catwoman is never mentioned. Catwoman's in this, but they use her alter ego name, and I loved that as a kid. I was like, "Oh, I know who that is. I know who Selena."
Well, just at the very end, when you have the heartbeat, all of a sudden you see the little thing and you see Clark Kent turn. He's like, "Huh?" But the whole heartbeat thing that Clark Kent hears, I mean, that's just brilliant. That's because great. they do the little heartbeat monitor,
and they don't say
they don't say. There's
Superman
no word
with his super hearing. You have to know.
There's absolutely no text on that page at all. If you think about it, you go look at that page, no text.
Superman challenges Batman to a fight by using heat vision to blast, Ware into the ground. Yeah. And he's not even in the shot. You just see the words written on the ground in fire. Yeah. And if you don't know Superman has heat vision, you don't know what the heck's going on.
Where? Yeah.
Who's reading this that doesn't know that? Yeah. That's pretty basic Superman information. So I thought that's one of my favorite things about these books. all the characters coming together, and it's mostly their non-superhero lives that you see. You mostly see them as their like regular street personas, like Green Arrow's in it just as like Oliver Reed or whatever the heck his name is.
Oliver,
Oliver Reed's not right. That's the medical center in DC, but it's Oliver something. I don't remember. Oliver Stone or whatever. Nope, that's not it.
That's not it either. Oliver something or other. Yeah.
So you hadn't read this in a long time, and I think we're at about the right time in the show. Did you have a biggest surprise when you reread this?
I did, but what's yours?
You want me to go? Okay.
Yeah, I'll let you go first.
So my biggest surprise is I had this conversation a lot of the time when I was a kid, does Batman have superpowers? And I finally came down to the conclusion it's sort of that, yeah, he does. His superpower is that he is richer than anybody really is. He has more money and more resources than any actual person could ever have. That's his superpower.
Right.
But reading this, I think in this one, I think Batman has supernatural powers in this. I think that makes him younger, gives him the will to fight, it makes him lucky in combat and things like that. I think he actually has superpowers in this version. I think he's got some kind of supernatural inspiration from the spirit of this bat creature. Because remember, his mustache disappears.
Yeah, right.
He suddenly looks a lot younger and stuff like that. I think there's something going on. I think there is a supernatural element to this. So I think in this version, Batman does have some version of superpower, similar to Black Panther, actually. It's like he's got the spirit of this bat in him that makes him have superpowers.
Something that we didn't explore is Batman's psychoses, which I think Miller really kind of explores. About him.
It's more like just PTSD.
Yeah. He's like, totally. Yeah, absolutely. He's completely traumatized, and he's got whatever disorders, and they're manifesting.
He gets triggered by a late night showing of Zorro.
Yes, right. Because that's the show that he watched when. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean,
and also the whole character of Batman is inspired by Zorro. So.
Well, and like I said, we never talked about that, but that's something that Miller really kind of explores, is like how he was traumatized as a kid, and he carries his trauma through as an adult, and it kind of manifests itself as the Batman. And so the Batman is then a manifested version. I mean, it's a mental issue, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So so.
He actually turns it around, I think, if you think about it, a pretty positive way to use that trauma. If you think about it, it makes him a very functional person in some ways. I guess sometimes he gets depicted as being a little crazier, and sometimes it's pretty functional. And anyway, so I think I've probably given away my opinion on this. I don't think that this is like great.
Wait, hold on. I have to do my biggest surprise. Yeah, my biggest surprise.
Oh, I thought you were. Yeah.
No. So my biggest surprise. So my vocation is technical communication. That's what I got my bachelor's, master's basically in, and so all that geeky stuff would probably come to play anywhere. I found out that Vincent Conner, who is a designer, a graphic designer, was inspired, who worked for Microsoft in the 1980s. Was inspired by Batman Returns, or The Dark Knight Returns, and Watchmen when he created Comic Sans font.
Oh, yeah. I saw that. Yeah, I saw that.
And I actually went back and I looked, and I have Watchmen, and I looked at this, and you look at the lettering on it, and it is Comic Sans. And it's like it's apparently the first time that it appeared. And so when he created that font for Microsoft, he used Dark Knight and Watchmen as the basis. So I was like,
that's funny.
That's fantastic. I love it. Now I know the origin of that with my students and even my kids, because I know how I feel about that silly font.
That's a good biggest surprise. I did read that, and I forgot to write it down. I thought that was really interesting. Yeah, it's a good one.
So, well, it's just so apropos based on what I do. So I'll be able to tell all my students that, and they're all asleep anyway, so none of them will care. But in any case, yeah, that's it. So, all right. So now we get back to the point where you say this is the this is a genius, and pat me on the back for picking it.
I had this. This came out as a graphic novel reprint around the time of the Tim Burton movie, and I got it. I think I got it at Costco, or what they used to call it, Price Club. But it was like one of the things that was out. They used to have great graphic novels. I got Ninja Turtles and Batman, all kinds of good stuff there. But I had this. I read it over and over again. I was super into Batman that summer, and like I hadn't read it in years and years. So really, the only question was whether I was still going to like it. But I took Cleo out to Brooklyn, and I just read this all the way back on the train. And I was like, that train ride went by like in a snap, which is just the perfect time to read is on the train. The graphic novel is a great thing to have while I'm actually going to do Sandman now and read that while I'm on the train.
Yeah, so, very cool. Yeah.
I mean, I just loved reading this again. I thought this was just as good as I remember it being, just as entertaining as I remember it being. I would recommend this. If somebody was only going to read 4 or 5 graphic novels, I might give them this. You know, if they're going to read, I don't know a whole lot of Batman, but I would certainly point somebody to this if they haven't read any Batman either. So yeah, this definitely gets my vote. This is one of my favorite.
Sweet. We should actually start keeping tally.
We should, but we almost always vote in favor. I was talking to the guys on the last show, and my friend Joe said something about how since he only could vote yes or no, that he always votes yes. And I'm saying, well, you're not voting whether it's good, you're voting whether it's a classic. Like I can completely unequivocally say this is a classic graphic novel. This is one of the bests of the genre. You know, but some of these other things, it's not that I hate them if I don't think they're a classic, but they're just not a classic. And I think we voted a couple of things down, but I think we're something I think we're like 80% that we vote.
Probably, at least. Yeah, that's a good point.
It would be interesting to go back and do a tally. Maybe I'll do that between shows next time, and I'll have the data ready. If we have a listener out there who wants to send something to toastingtheclassics@gmail.com, that would be pretty fun.
Yeah, and do that for us. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, that would be great. So,
all right, man. Well,
I think we're good. I think this one's going into the Toasting the Classics canon. We've done 2 comic things now, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, this and Fantastic Four. Yeah.
Cool. So anyway, I think we'll go ahead and sign off. This is Dave McArthur.
This is Clint Lanier.
Peace out, everybody. See you next time.
Bye. See ya.
That's it for episode 61 of Toasting the Classics. For those playing along at home, get some sake for our discussion of the original kaiju film, Godzilla. If you'd like to get in touch, please send us an email at toastingtheclassics@gmail.com. Send us show ideas, comments, complaints, and let us know your pick on the old Dark Knight Returns versus the Watchmen debate. Check out my blog at theattractivenuisance.com and follow us on Twitter at @attractivenuisance. Our music was written by Michelle McArthur. See you next time on Toasting the Classics.